Okay, so today we are going to be looking at JavaScript. We're not doing the full deep dive that maybe some of you were hoping for. JavaScript really should be a class unto its own because it is a full and complete programming language. But we are going to consider three topics today with JavaScript. We're going to be looking at how to load an external script, loading or adding a embedded script, and JavaScript events. When we're talking about JavaScript in connection with HTML and CSS, I want to talk through what JavaScript is based on what we've learned so far. So keep in mind that HTML, it defines the structure, the web content of a page. HTML is like the bones. It's the frame. If we were somewhere besides Saipan, right, it would be the 2x4 frames and the rafters and everything that define what it is. The CSS would be the exterior coating and the colors and the paint and everything. And JavaScript really is about behavior. JavaScript makes your page more than just a finite structure. It adds behavior and action. So when you're thinking about this, about these three elements on a web page, you have to realize that HTML is obviously required. Even if you were to go to some site like Squarespace or what is the other one, Wix, at the underlying level, it is still HTML. They may be using JavaScript and CSS, but for a website, HTML is required. CSS is not required, but if you want to make it appealing, you really need to add CSS. JavaScript, on the other hand, is not required. It can enhance your websites, and of course, there's a lot of things you can do with CSS now to make your pages look pretty, but it's not required. Adding JavaScript, it'll allow you to define special behavior. So CSS allows you to define your styling, and your behavior means things like mouse clicks, key events, whether a element on the page has focus or does not have focus. And we'll talk about more of those later on. Even the idea of gaining focus, and there's a bunch more events that are associated with behavior, the behavior of your page when a user clicks on something or enters text or whatnot. And again, with JavaScript, you can enhance the functionality of the page by controlling the actions and behavior. So enhancing user experience, right? You usually use JavaScript to show and hide content. And today's assignment that you're going to be looking at actually is a very easy way to show and hide content. And I'll be walking you through that later. It provides more complicated ways to load data. One of the APIs that's very common now, it's called Angular. It provides what's called a single page application, meaning JavaScript loads the HTML onto the page and loads the CSS so that you only ever load one page. It provides a lot of interesting functionality that way, but JavaScript can complicate how you load the data. You can build carousels or slideshows with JavaScript. When you're looking at things like Google Meet or Google Docs or all of those added features, behind the scenes, it's just JavaScript doing all of that. It's controlling how you access audio and video elements and building multimedia controls. It's all done in JavaScript. In fact, you can create games with JavaScript. You can create animations using the canvas element. So you can have complex movies that are all framed out using JavaScript. There's a couple of cool libraries out there. In fact, one of them it uses all JavaScript inside of the canvas element, and I'm trying to remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it gives you the ability to create very complex animations and images. They embed it with SVG, which is that other image type we talked about briefly, and you can do a lot of cool things there. JavaScript, you can use geolocations. So, for example, you may go to a website and the site may say, "Oh, I see that you're in Saipan." And you're like, "I didn't tell you I was in Saipan." Well, the JavaScript loaded your browser information. It took the IP, it ran a query in the background, brought it back, and said, "You know what? You're in Saipan," right? If you ever are using a VPN, it might tell you that, "Hey, I see you're in New York City," right? That's using geolocation to customize your user's experience. You can add the ability to drag and drop on a page, especially the idea of dragging and dropping files. When you're uploading files, we looked at this a little bit when we were talking about the form elements. You can actually use JavaScript to allow a user to listen for the file to be hovered over a particular widget on the page, and it will automatically grab it and upload it. And there's a good number of scripts that actually do this for you. One of those is jQuery, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. You can write full-blown web applications with JavaScript, and you can do some very, very powerful features. I wish we had another 6-7 weeks, because there's so much that we could teach and demonstrate with JavaScript, and it's really a good intro language to learn some programming fundamentals. Okay, I mentioned here that it's a good idea for you to use a solid library like a jQuery. Now, the reason for this is, although JavaScript, the behavior and functionality is fairly simple between applications, there was a time, and there still is among some browsers, that the implementation of JavaScript is not quite there. And so the ways you accomplish particular functionality is different between browsers. jQuery is a library that actually it makes your functionality more agnostic to that respect. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this for you all, because I want you to take the time to look at jQuery. There's a lot of great functionality here and things that I think you guys should be considering and learning about. There, I just sent it to everyone in the chat. And please go ahead and take a moment now to open that up, and we'll talk through this. Let me change my screen layout a little bit here. On the jQuery website, you can see that you can download it. There's also there's an external script that you can use on jQuery, and you can link directly to it. I don't recommend you doing that. Unless you're just doing this for testing to keep the latest, but generally it's better to download the latest and go from there. jQuery also offers some other projects. There's jQuery user interface, and these encapsulate various buttons, things that you can use to change the look and feel of your page. For example, if you click on some of their widgets, you can see things like the accordion. Gives you these very cool pieces of functionality. You have an autocomplete, which gives you a type ahead feature. So I could type, let's see, there you go. Just, it has a very limited set, but as you type ahead, it limits, and you supply the data in the background. There's other things like menus that give you ability to add extra features to your page, and all of this is done through JavaScript and CSS, and they package it up sometimes with some images in the background, and they make it really nice. Here's an example of the date picker. For example, I told you that some browsers don't have the full implementation, and so the jQuery date picker is a good way to get around this. You can use the date picker to do a lot of cool things. There's spinners, so you can, this is what's called a spinner, this this toggle up and down button thing. You have buttons. These are enhanced buttons. May not look very different, but they're considered enhanced buttons. You also have things like effects, so you can have easing, hiding, removing a class, showing. Let me give you an example of hiding. Hiding gives you the ability, if you run the effect, it hides it, right? You can use blind, bounce, right? There's a lot of different examples they have available. Again, this is jQuery, and that's jQuery UI. Let's go back to the other projects. They have a thing called jQuery unit testing. This allows you to test your jQuery scripts, your libraries, and they have jQuery Mobile, which is specifically designed for your mobile devices. Again, I'd recommend taking a moment to look through this and learn jQuery, especially as you move forward in software development. Let's go back to our slide deck again here for a moment. The other one that's kind of important, and by the way, we will look at jQuery a little bit next week. We're going to kind of walk through the basics of JavaScript, variables, types, operators, arithmetic, and so forth. And we'll learn a little bit how to use jQuery. Another important library that's out there is Node.js. Now, jQuery and JavaScript in themselves, they only run in the browser. What a lot of folks decided is that, JavaScript is a really good language. It's grown a lot since 1990 something. And let's go ahead and create an implementation of JavaScript that will run web servers. And that's where Node.js came from. This is another great site for you to take a look at. You can run Node.js on your laptops, Windows, Macs, Linux, so forth. It's a great server to learn how to use. Okay. All right. So let's focus today on how to insert the scripts into an HTML page, how to minimize the impact of the pages and the display time, and look at some JavaScript event handlers. Now, thinking about JavaScript, it was invented by this company. There's probably only maybe one or two of you that's heard of Netscape. Back in 1995, when the internet was really kicking off, there were only two browsers that were available back then. There was Netscape and there was Internet Explorer. And this kicked off the browser wars. Netscape actually created JavaScript. They introduced it in 1995, and they did this as a way to add programs to your web pages. Now, since then, it's been adopted all across the many different browsers. But back in the day when it first came out, Internet Explorer wanted people to use their VB script engine, which was very popular with their Visual Basic for Applications. And Visual Basic for Applications is still widely used with Microsoft Access, with Word, with Excel, a number of applications. And so they thought, hey, we'll implement VB script into the browser. And this was extremely popular for a number of years. I don't think VB script in the browser is still a thing anymore because not all browsers support VB script, right? But all browsers do support JavaScript. JavaScript has made modern web applications possible. Now, what I mean by an application is anything that allows you to type text into a field and to process data to do something that you would normally do on like a regular application, right? So think of Google Docs, for example, right? That's a modern web application, or Google Sheets, modern web application. When I worked for the Department of the Army and for a number of other organizations, even Indiana State, we all created web applications for processing student data. So in fact, when you go out and you look at the NMC website, you fill out a form online, that is part of a web application. It's crunching data and doing something with it. And JavaScript has really made web applications possible. Now, the only thing that Java and JavaScript have in common are the names, okay? So Java and JavaScript, they have nothing to do with each other. The name, and the reason this was chosen, is because when Java was being heavily marketed back around the same time in the early 90s, Netscape thought, hey, let's ride the wave and call our script in our browser JavaScript. They are absolutely nothing alike. Java is a very strongly typed language. JavaScript is not. What I mean by that is, in a strongly typed language, you can specify a type as a string, an int, a byte, a long, as other objects. And in JavaScript, you can create a variable and on the fly assign it values. And it's very flexible that way, but it'll also get you in a lot of trouble because you can't very easily sometimes figure out when you've overwritten a type. Okay. All right. So the other thing that's kind of interesting here, JavaScript today is also known as ECMA script. ECMA script. In fact, there is a W3 standard for ECMA script, but in general, if you say JavaScript, everyone's going to know what you're talking about. And if you say ECMA script, any experienced developer is also going to know what you're talking about. They're kind of used interchangeably. Okay. What about adding JavaScript, external libraries? All right. So there are a huge number of libraries to consider when it comes to JavaScript. There are so many that if you were just to do a search on the web, popular JavaScript libraries, it'll go on for pages and pages and pages. The big ones, though, the ones that I want you to think about, and I want you to especially start using on your own, concern jQuery. You can see here a statistic that I found. This is from last year, but in general, I know this number hasn't changed. 73% of all websites on the internet, they use jQuery as the library and framework. So you really do need to begin thinking about getting to know jQuery. It's used in general to make calls in all browsers. When I say it makes the scripting agnostic, it means that jQuery hides the underlying implementation so that you only have to do it one way instead of learning how to do the same thing 5 different ways for each browser. It's a very powerful language, and it's a good coding methodology to use. Native JavaScript is just like CSS. It's not supported the same way across all browsers, and jQuery solves this. Another great API to learn, JavaScript API, is called React. And the data shows that 70% of all developers claim to know or use React. It's also a great library that I encourage all of you guys to get to know. It's often used for marketing interfaces, and it focuses primarily on this topic called NVC. Has anyone ever heard of NVC before? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumb sideways. Okay. NVC, as you can see, it stands for model, view, and controller. Think of a model as how a particular piece of data is laid out. So you may construct a model of a car, and the data that is represented in that model is something that you would ideally pass around. Okay? And so in JavaScript, the model is most likely going to be written in JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. That's a model. The view is the HTML, the CSS, right? And then the controller is the piece of server code in the background that takes the model and it integrates it and decides which view you should be seeing. So for example, if you make a get call and you pass in a certain parameter, it's going to decide in the background, the controller will decide which view you see. So React uses this MVC framework. And as you guys move forward in software development, MVC is a very, very popular paradigm. It's a model. It's a way of doing things. Another one, and these are all very important, AngularJS, which I really should remove AngularJS at this point because it's been replaced by Angular. And I think the last standard, we're at Angular 5, getting ready to go to Angular 6 now. Another one is Bootstrap. Bootstrap has a CSS library as well as a JavaScript library. And Bootstrap is one that's very, 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 very popular. There's a lot you can do with Bootstrap. In fact, Bootstrap and jQuery are often integrated with Angular. The same thing as with React. They'll use all of those together with Angular. And there's much, much more. But if I was to tell you which ones to get familiar with right now, I would say learn jQuery, learn Bootstrap, and begin looking at Angular. Okay? All right, so back to the topic. Loading an external script. Loading an external script. There's primarily two kinds of scripts. We really could say there's three, but there's really two kinds of scripts. The second is a 2A and a 2B if we were to term it that way, but we'll keep it simple right now. One is loading these from an external file, and the other is embedding onto your page. Now, just like CSS, style sheets being loaded from an external site, it's the same thing we want for JavaScript. We want those pieces of code, those scripts, to be loaded from an external file, just like our CSS is put in an external file, instead of embedding it. And the reason is that we call it spaghetti code. Okay? This is what happens in your HTML often when you link and create things all over the place. Okay? It makes it next to impossible to figure out and maintain, and we call it spaghetti code. We don't want to do that. We want to keep everything separate. We want separation of concerns. Y'all like my image? I thought that was pretty cute. This was like my team lead back in the day, my tech lead. When I began to do things, I did it often like that in spaghetti code. And he said, Mike, separate your code. Separation of concerns, Mike. And it's something you guys need to be thinking about as well when you're writing your code, even in web development. Make sure that you keep all of your page content nice and neat and separated. It'll make it easier for you for maintenance, for editing, and especially when you come back 6 months later and look at your code and go, what was I thinking? I'm going to be honest with you. I sometimes can't remember what I did yesterday or last week is a nightmare. If you try to remember stuff that you put in your code from a year ago and you have to go back and edit it, It is painful. You'll spend hours trying to weed through it. So always make your code. Keep things nice, neat, and separated, okay? So CSS should be in a CSS folder. JavaScript should be in a scripts folder. And HTML should be clean and only reference to everything else. All right. Do I need to make this image bigger? Do y'all get it, right? Okay. So whoops. That was weird. External what's going on there? Let's present that again. There we go. So external JavaScript. I want you to consider the following code example. So you have your head tag, you have the meta tag talking about your char set, you have a title, which will show up in the top little tab, right, of your browser. And we have a comment, and in the comment we're saying load style sheet before JS files. Repeat that with me. I will load my style sheets before my JS files. Okay? Everyone, you go to bed at night making that your mantra. The reason you want to do that is you want this to show up. You want your page to be visible before any of the script shows up. Oftentimes the scripts can get so complicated and there's so much things going on that it causes your page to freeze for a moment and nothing will load, and then your user will get frustrated, right? So always make sure that your style sheets are loaded first. Okay. Did we lose somebody? I think we lost Layla, didn't we? No, there she is down at the bottom. Okay. So the next tag that we see, and this is the important one, it is the script tag. And in this instance, because we're loading external, the script tag has a source attribute. And the source says equal and the name of the script that we're linking to. The other interesting thing you'll see is the closing tag. This is, of course, required. You have to have a closing tag. And then in this example, we have the head. Now, you don't have to put your script inside the head, but you do need to make sure that it is at least below the opening head. Okay? It's either below the opening head or inside of the body tag. So here's an example loading a different script. Here you can see I'm loading externally to the jQuery site, and it has the version number of their script. I have again the script, the source attribute, equals, and in double quotes I have the name of the script that we're loading. Then I put my greater than symbol, and then I have my closing tag. This is required. You have to do it this way. The script tag can this tag can be loaded anywhere on the page as long as it's before the closing body. Now, I didn't say this on the page, but you don't want to put the script tag in between the body and the head, right? You don't want to put it, that doesn't work. You can't do that. You can put it in the head or you can put it in the body. It's often better to put it at the bottom of your page before the closing body tag. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. All right, so things to keep in mind. The load, you load your script after the CSS, not before. Am I starting to sound like a broken record now? Load your CSS first, then load your script. If you do it that way, you won't impact the loading of your style or the rest of your page. You want the scripts to be loaded the very, very last, okay? And of course, it's even better to put the script tag at the bottom of the page. And this does a couple of things for us. It allows the entire page to load first. Remember that the browser loads the page from the top down to the bottom. It reads a file just like you do. Well, for the most part, right? When you guys have your homework assignments, you all read every little word, right? No? You don't do that? All right, well, the browsers do that. They have to read from the top all the way down to the bottom. Doing this, it doesn't stop images or styles from being loaded, okay? And the other thing is consider minimized scripts. Minimized scripts are files which are compressed. Organize your scripts in either a JS folder or a scripts folder, and you'll find that some organizations, and this all depends on the technical lead, they'll create an assets folder, and inside of the assets folder they'll have a CSS, they'll have a scripts folder, they'll have images and maybe audio video, and that's how they choose to organize. But the bottom line, organize your site, right? If you're like me, I often just use a JS because it's just 2 letters to type. I don't have to type a lot. All right. Order of loading. The order a script is loaded is from top down, just like a browser. So this means that each script is called sequentially. Okay? Think about what that means. When a script is loaded, it's called sequentially. So my wife sometimes gives me a grocery list. And her grocery list is sometimes just like a stream of thought. And it'll say whatever's most important on her mind at the time. Chocolate. Whatever's most important is always at the top to her, right? And then as you go down the script, sometimes this grocery list has beans, and then it has potatoes, it has milk, it has spaghetti noodles, right? And so what do I do as a good husband? I go to the store with my grocery list, and I go to the first item on the list, chocolate. All right, easy, got the chocolate. Grab the chocolate off the stand. Next one says milk. So I go to the dairy section, I grab the milk. Next one says spaghetti. I go to the other side of the store to get the spaghetti. Next one says yogurt. I go back to the other side of the store now. Do y'all see a pattern? Okay. So however you term your items in your script, it's going to read it sequentially. And so if you tell it to do things that depend on previous steps, you need to make sure that those previous steps are stated first, right? Behavior intended, the behavior intended needs to be called first. So if you have a behavior that says, if you have a behavior that depends on the jQuery library, and in your own personal script, you write something that depends on the jQuery library, what's first, your script or the jQuery library? Someone shout it out. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so the jQuery library lays out all of the details inside of it that makes it possible for you to use the jQuery script in your own script, right? So you want to make sure that the behavior intended to be called first means that the script must be loaded first. Behavior that you want called first means that that script needs to be loaded first. So if the behavior you want loaded first is jQuery, then that jQuery script has to be loaded first. So if you write a script using jQuery.js, then jQuery.js must be loaded first on that page before your script, which depends on jQuery, right? This is the top-down process. And if you think about it in that way, it helps you to also kind of think about the performance attributes of your page. So if you have a script that must be loaded first before anything else on the page, Say it's a script that for some reason determines what CSS file is loaded. Well, that script has to be loaded first before the behavior of those CSS files. If your script has to be loaded first in order to determine what should be put on the page, then you have to load your script first. This drives performance. It drives the behavior of your page. It drives everything. It's all sequential. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down, right? Okay. Now this may look ugly. This is minified. And the browser understands it perfectly. This minified script has, there's some libraries out there that'll do it for you. For example, there's a variable here called C, and there's a variable called D. And in general, when we write our code, we want to be very explicit in how we name things. Omar, you probably remember this from the Java class. I always talked about making sure that you write your code in a way that is understandable so that you could read it later. The thing about most code libraries, other than JavaScript, is that you have an English version of the code that's understandable, that has things written out in a way that makes sense to you. The names of the variables reference the behavior and the subject and the verb of the code. And then when you compile them, they compile down to these intermediate code states. Like in Java, it compiles down to bytecode. And then the virtual machine interprets it down into the machine code. In C++, it compiles it all the way down to machine code. In JavaScript, you don't really have that ability. JavaScript is native text interpreted. So whatever you type in JavaScript, it's going to be that way. And so some folks got creative over the years because they realized that the smaller the amount of text, the faster it loads and the better performance. So they came up with ways to minify your code. And anytime you can, it's a good idea to take your JavaScript, run it through a minifier, something that will minify it, and then take the minified code and use that on your page. So in this example, you see function, and you have the parentheses here, which represent the parameter values that are being passed in. In function, it takes an E and a C. And after it, we have a curly bracket, and we have a var, which says var D equals C dot get element by ID, and it specifies find this element on the page that has the ID choices. And once you find it, assign it to the variable D, right? And you could literally read the code all the way through this way. But when it was originally written, the D element would have been something more representative of what this function was meant to do, okay? And so the minified version, it saves you space and so forth. Now, when you name these files, you want to name it the name, standard name of what it is. Usually the name specifies the behavior. So if your code library has a particular behavior that you're wanting to capture, make the name the behavior of your code. And then if it's minified, you'll say .min.js. That's just the standard way that all developers look at it. So you're telling all developers then it's .min, it's minified. If it doesn't have a .min, then it's unminified. Okay? All right, any questions so far? Any questions? You guys are awake, right? All right. Well, let's move on here. These are some of the libraries that are good for minifying. Google Closure Compiler. And I'm going to jump out here because I didn't make these links accessible. So I'm going to copy these links and paste them into the chat room for you all. Google Closure Compiler. There's also one. There's an online version you can pass your code to, and it will do the same thing. There's another one called Uglify. I love that name. We as developers, we really come up with some great names sometimes. All right, so this one is found at GitHub. I'll go ahead and copy that and put it out in the chat for you all. They have a Lisp version, and I'm not going to talk about Lisp just yet, but basically anytime we're we'll come back to that later. Then there is something called the UE compressor. This is made by Yahoo, and this was a very common one for a long time, even before Google came up with Thurs. Here's another link I'm going to paste for you all. These are all good to have as samples for being able, when you write your scripts, to minify them. And not just that, sometimes the folks who wrote the script that you're looking for may be in GitHub and they don't have a minified version of it. You can always take the copy of their code and run it through one of these minifiers and produce a smaller version. Okay. Now again, it's best to put external JavaScript at the end of your page because you want to avoid blocking. So if you link to a page that's out on the web somewhere, make sure you put it at the very bottom, because you got to think when the page loads top down, what's it doing? It hits your CSS and it goes and it grabs the CSS out of your files and it pulls it in. But if you have an external JavaScript that's way out there on another site, now you've created a blocking scenario, because it's going to pause and go out, try to download that script, and if there's a problem, your site will spin for about 20 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever the timeout is before it finally releases, and that's not good for driving people to your site. So always put all of those scripts at the bottom. And if you can, always download the script off their site and put it on your site so you have faster load times. You don't want people to wait. All right. This is the second way that you can deal with JavaScript, and this is embedding. I also talked about this is sometimes known as inline script. Typically, when you embed a script, you can embed a script anywhere on the page. When it's up in the head, it's just usually some script that you want to take precedence for some reason, right? Sometimes it's good to maybe start your script there if you're just trying to edit things on the fly to keep from switching back and forth between files. But if it was me, I would put all my scripts in a separate file and then load them. But this is the way you can do it. Now, you want to, again, limit when you do this, because you don't want to end up with spaghetti code. You don't want to fill your site with different script tags all over the place in this fashion. Try to limit what you're doing. All right, I have a simple example here on the page. I want to demonstrate just real quick. We're going to go over here to our site, and we're going to create a new folder, and we're just going to call it JavaScript sample. And in our JavaScript sample, I'm going to create a new HTML, a new index.html. And inside my JavaScript samples project folder here. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it JS. Okay. And in my JS, I'm going to create a new file, and we're going to call it my script.js. Okay. We'll go to our index, HTML. We'll allow Adam to generate the code for us. And as I promised, good practice, we're going to put our script at the bottom. So we're going to type script, hit enter, and you'll notice a couple of things here that Adam gives you the option to either make it embedded or not. We're going to link to an external script, okay? The other thing that Adam does, oh really? Snap. Yeah, okay. Let's stop sharing for a moment. I think it's the way I was sharing the screen. I'll share the desktop this time. All right, can you guys see? All right, so let me clarify. I've created a folder for my project called JavaScript sample. Inside of that folder, I've created a JS file, a JS folder to hold my JavaScripts, okay? And inside of that, I created a script called myscript.js. All right. At the root of my project folder, I created an index.html, and I have let Adam generate all of the HTML for us. All right, so what I wanted to show you here, this is important. Adam generates this page as we see here. And the script tag, it puts in this type equals JavaScript. Now, before HTML5, you had to specify anytime you had script. And this is because when VBScript was still a thing, you could say type is VBScript. But VBScript is not a thing anymore, so you don't have to put that. If you do, and Adam leaves it in there, it's not going to complain. It won't barf at you or anything. So we want to use the source. And for our source, we're going to specify the JS folder. And the name of my script is my script.js. And we'll save it. And we're going to do just a simple paragraph here, sample page with a script. Okay. And I'm going to put a notification text here. Please click on me. Okay. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down in what we're trying to accomplish here, but I am going to demonstrate just briefly the various ways that you can access this script. So we're going to go to my script. We're going to have a function called click me, and inside of this, we're going to say document.get element by ID, and we're going to specify an ID. Now give me 1 second here. Okay. we're going to assign this by declaring the var. And var means variable. We're going to declare a variable, and we're going to say that the variable is my paragraph. And now we're going to go back to our p tag. We're going to specify an ID. Not like that. Like that. And we're going to specify an ID of my paragraph. Okay. We'll save what we have. We'll come over to the scripts. We're going to paste in my paragraph. So get element by ID, my paragraph. Okay. We've assigned the my paragraph. And then we're going to use a built-in function called alert, and we're going to pass in my paragraph dot text. I think would work. We'll see. May not. All right. So we have click me. We have the function, right? So we're going to come over here to this text. And we want to do something, right? So there's a couple ways we can do it, and we're just going to use the event. So we can say on click, and we're going to specify the function name. And the function name is click me. And I'm putting a semicolon there at the end. You'll need to do that. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. We'll open up. Let me exit the presentation here. We'll open up a new page. Say open file. And go to our NMC site, CSS222. Let's see, my website, and it was JavaScript samples, index HTML, and we'll open. All right, sample page with script, click me. I click on it, and you can see it called the alert method, right? Now, very simply, we're just invoking a behavior by performing this click, right? Let's go back, and just to kind of give you an idea, there's a lot of things that you can do here. I think this is HTML we need to specify. Or no, it is inner HTML. That's what it is. Let's try it again. Refresh it. And you can see now I'm spitting out the contents that I just typed, right? So if we think about what we're doing here, we've taken the paragraph, we've taken the value in a function, we've grabbed the data from it, assigned it to this variable, my paragraph, and then for the my paragraph we said dot inner HTML, which gives us the data inside the paragraph. Okay. Now, if you think about it, there's other things you can do as well. You could say var my, let's see, my new text equals my paragraph dot inner HTML plus space plus, well, let's see. Let's do it like that. Put a, come on, semicolon at the end. I just clicked you. Right? And so now we've saved it. Go back over here, refresh it to update the script. We click on it. Oh, nothing. Nothing. Why is that? Oh, because we didn't call this. There we go. And we don't need that anymore. Again, this is not a JavaScript class. We're just kind of introducing some of the basics. But inner HTML is a property of all of your document elements. And all we're saying is give me the text, give me the inside of that HTML, convert it to text, and append this piece of text to it as well, and assign it to this variable. Okay? And then we're saying spit out that variable. All right, so we saved it, refresh it. Please click on me. I just clicked on you. Click on it again, right? We could take it a step further and have even a little bit more fun with it. We could say now var my paragraph dot inner HTML plus my new text. Now think what's going to happen now. Technically, I should be, did I spell that right? Oh, no, I don't need to specify a var. If I do that, I overwrite it. So technically now I'm assigning whatever I've appended to this variable back to the inner HTML. And if I refresh it, I click on it, oh, it's not doing anything. So sometimes you got to bring up the console and watch what happens when you click on it. And nothing's happening. Did we save? Oh. I'm not paying attention, guys. Does that make sense? This will. Now we're taking the combination of these two and we're assigning it. All right. Let's refresh it. Why is it not overriding it? Let's take a look here and see. What's happening. So refresh it. Yep. It's appending it there, but it's not putting it back in. We'd have to figure it out, but this is, in essence, how we're loading. We're performing some very basic JavaScript. Now, this is one way of doing it. We're saying on click. We have the script that's set there, and it does it. The other way that we can do this is we can have another script tag. And inside the script tag, we could say click, let's see, no, how about load me? And we're going to pass in a variable, single quotes, load me. This method doesn't exist yet, but remember, if we're following the order top down, we have the script, and then we have another script tag that says call this method load me, and I'm passing in this value, right? So we'll come over here. We will just, for our intention, we'll copy the code. We'll call this load me, and this is going to be an ID, and this is going to be an ID there, right? And we'll add some extra text in here. Loaded through the load me method. Whoops. Yeah. Loaded through the load me method. Appending our text. So if we save that, we come back up here again, refresh it. There it is. It called the text because now when the page loads, it goes top down, it hits that script, it loads our script onto the page, it goes to the next step, and it loads the function call that we told it to load. So loaded through the load me method, sample page with script, blah, 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 right? All right, so those are two ways we could do it. Now with jQuery, jQuery offers another way of doing it, and it's called document on load, and you use special syntax, and it's really great to do it that way. This is the most basic level of loading and dealing with scripts. All right, so I've given you some examples, talk through it a little bit. Any questions so far with what we've done? Okay. I mean, now keep in mind, notice that this script, even though it's inside the body, it's not being displayed, is it? It's not visible anywhere. It's inside the body, but these scripts are not visible. If you look at it again, nothing there. Nothing's displayed on the page because these are not text visible. Now, if you go to your elements, you go down to your body, you would see them down here in the body when you inspect, right? Okay. Another feature that you can do inside of Chrome is using the console. So you can say things like this. You can call the method, which is there, and I'm going to say my paragraph. And this is primarily used for testing. I've loaded it down here on this console, and if I hit enter, it calls the method and it displays it. Similarly, at the console level, you can do things like this. You can say alert, hit enter, and it displays the alert, right? You can write full code. You can say, let's say, document, get element by ID, specify my ID, because I only have one ID on the page, my paragraph. I'd hit enter, and it grabs that, as you can see down here at the bottom of the page, it grabs that in the console and it makes it visible, right? I've grabbed that element. Does everyone see that? Okay. Let's go ahead and jump back to our lecture here. So we've talked a little bit about, let me back up here to, we talked about the loading top down. We demonstrated it in our code through the browser. The importance of where you place your method calls, right? Let me go back. We didn't really demonstrate that. What if I go into Atom here, and now I put this script up here? Do you guys see that? Okay. If I put this script before, what do you think is going to happen? Yeah, just top down. So let's make sure I've saved this. Yep, it's all saved. If I refresh, nothing's happening. In fact, if I go into inspect, you'll notice, what is it saying down here? Load me is not defined because I'm trying to call a method that the browser doesn't even know about yet, right? So it's, again, that top-down methodology. Okay. Guys, you have any questions so far? Everyone pretty clear on what's happening? Yeah? All right. So we looked at the top-down order of loading. Let's see here. Let's jump forward. We've talked about minification. We've talked about the best practices for minifying your scripts, right? And embedding. And so we just did a brief example of embedding some code. This slide here is actually wrong. You don't use the hashtag when you're doing this. When you're in jQuery, you do use the hashtag when you're passing in the variables, but here you don't use the hashtag when you're using document get element by ID. Okay. So we have this sample script in place, right? This is totally okay. Script, closing script, your code in the center. The only time this is not permissible is when the script tag itself has a source attribute. When you do that, it's going to ignore what's inside of your script here. So if we go back to our sample code, I'm going to move this piece of code down here. And you notice that I have an opening script tag and I have a closing script tag, right? But if I try to do this, load me, this is not going to be recognized, okay? That will not be recognized. Now let me demonstrate by commenting out my code here a little bit. I have the script with a source, the load me inside the two tags, and if we try to refresh the code, it doesn't do anything. It ignores it completely. It thinks it doesn't exist. Okay. So when you're writing your code, don't try to think, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and do it all in one step. Put my extra code that calls the source from the external. Yeah, it won't work. You can't do it that way. Okay, so some other things to consider about the script tag. The script tag always has an open and close tag. You always have to have the open tag and the close tag. Okay. When you have a script tag that has a source attribute, you can't put code inside of it. We just talked about that, right? Cannot do this. Will not work. Will not work. Okay. And then we get to the events. And this is where it's kind of good to know these. So let's talk about on blur. On blur doesn't mean that you're seeing crazy with your eyes, okay? Doesn't mean you need new glasses or need glasses at all. On blur means that you have an element that is on the, your cursor is focused, or the cursor input is focused on a particular item, and when you leave that element, it's called blurring. Okay, so on blur is the event type that you would specify when you want to have an action or behavior occur when someone leaves an element, right? Sometimes that might be helpful if you're doing some type of form wizard and someone clicks on an element and leaves, and you're like, you know what, you really should have paid attention to me, this element, because unblur is helpful in that way for providing different types of responses. On change means that you're on the element and you change the value and you leave. This is when the value of the content of an input, radio button, text button, checkbox, text area, that value changes, and most commonly used on forms. On click, we just demonstrated the on click. There's also the on double click. So on double click works just like what you would expect. You have to double click in order to invoke the action. On focus, this is the opposite of on blur. You would think that they would make the name similar, like lost focus, on focus, but instead they call it on blur, on focus, right? So on focus means as soon as someone clicks into a particular element or item on the screen, as soon as you select. Key down, it means that the key on your keyboard is pressed down. Okay? Now this is important because that means that you're tracking on the press of the key what it is. A minute ago, I showed you a jQuery user interface library called, what was it, the autocomplete. The autocomplete that jQuery provides there uses the key up. And the reason for it is they want to capture the value after you've entered a key. So key down, key press, key up, you want to think about the behavior that you're trying to capture there. And then of course you have onload. So onload says when the browser finishes loading the page, including all external files, images, style sheets, JavaScript, and so forth, do something. That's helpful. For example, when I put that script on the page inside the script tag, that's kind of like an onload. On mouse down, this is when the visitor presses a button over a specified element. On mouse move, it tracks the movement of your cursor. On mouse out, on mouse over, on mouse up. Then you have on reset. This deals with the reset button of forms. On select, so if you have one of those drop down items, the select menus, and you select something, that's where on select is good. And then of course on submit. Okay, we are down to the last slide on JavaScript events. Now next week we're going to get into this a lot more, and hopefully I don't make your brains boil over and turn to mush next week, because JavaScript, you have to pay attention to what you're typing. It is case sensitive in the variables that you give things. It's a language. It's a programming language. Next week, we're going to look at it a little bit more, talk about how to create some functions, talk about things like loops and conditional statements, and just give you kind of a little bit more introduction to this. My hope is, with what we're introducing you to right now, that next year this will help you as you move on into the Java class, to give you some basic concepts of what a for loop is, what a while loop is, what if conditions and switches and all of that. Because they're used across all object-oriented family of languages. All C++ family of languages use those types of concepts. All right, guys, you have any questions for me at this point? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording because I have a document I need to upload for the homework assignment, and then we'll talk through the homework assignment. So give me just a moment here, and let me kill this recording.